Dun dun dun. Welcome back. I'm very excited because I have two guests with me today. One you have heard before and another you have not, but I will allow them to introduce themselves. Take it away.
This is Oreoluwa. You guys remember me from last time. It's finally summer, so I have some time to sit down with Vic and a special guest today who I'm actually honored to be here speaking with. So, yeah, please introduce yourself for us.
Thanks for having me, Victoria.
Of course.
My name is Litsa and I've been teaching as a sessional instructor in Social Justice Institute, and I've been teaching a range of courses in social justice. So I'm very honored to be here.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I hate to say I'm excited because I'm not excited. This is not an exciting thing to talk about, but I am definitely very happy to have you guys here to talk about this with me. So we're going to get started on kind of why we decided to talk about the so-called refugee crisis and kind of put some context to that. And I thought, yeah, I thought it was an important thing to talk about because in my classes that I've taken with Litsa, the refugee crisis has come up very frequently, and I think that it's one of the crises that is so obviously connected to everything else that's going on that it's a good place to go when you want to see the true root causes of everything we're seeing and what's going on, and when you want to feel more connected and have more hope and not feel like there's all these separate different issues that we have to tackle individually with all these different groups. And but when you really look at it, it's all the same and it's all connected and it all comes from root sources. And I think the refugee crisis is one of those things to talk about when you want to think about how connected issues are. So yeah, I mean, thoughts?
Well, I think what's important is to put it also in the context of the recent events in the Mediterranean and the way the so-called refugee crisis have been treated in contrast to what happened, for example, with the Titan, the submersible, all of these billionaires, exploring so-called the Titanic. Sorry.
With an Xbox controller.
Yes. So basically the idea is that we know that what happened on June the 14th is that a terrible, in a bad condition boat just sank on the off the coast of Greece in the deep waters of Mediterranean. And I think it was carrying about 700 people who were fleeing war and persecution and who were fleeing conflict and climate crisis. Now we have to remember that there were different kinds of populations on the boat who were fleeing different kinds of things. And some of them were from Afghanistan, some of them were from Pakistan, and the boat capsized, and more than 600 people have been missing, and some of them have been found already drowned. From the reports that we're hearing, survivors are saying that dead bodies of children were floating in the Mediterranean at the time. That we also know that the Coast Guard the Greek Coast Guard, they knew, and also the corporation that patrols the borders on behalf of the European
Yeah, they had
Union.
the Italian
Yeah.
Union.
Yes.
Emphasis on corporation.
Corporation. That corporation is called Frontex, and perhaps we will have an opportunity to talk about this later. Both the Greek Coast Guard and Frontex knew for 15 hours that the boat was about to sink, and
I didn't know that.
they
Just
did
wait. It actually
absolutely
gets
nothing.
worse. It actually gets worse.
And they were
Mhm.
the Greek Coast Guard were just throwing bottles of water to the people that were crying for help while the boat was sinking. And meanwhile, here in North America, and in fact across the globe, we were being hammered by mainstream media about 5 billionaires. We learned blow by blow about their life stories, about their families, about their passions, about their interests, how did they go in the Titan, how much money they spent, which was actually $250,000 per person. And
Just
the
so it
U.S.
was
and the Canadian military were doing all of these efforts to rescue them, and meanwhile, across the ocean, no one was doing anything to rescue women and children. And by the way, women and children were kept under the deck. That's even another detail that most people don't know. They were kept under the deck where fishermen keep frozen fish. So most of the people that drowned were women and children. So this is what we are facing.
It's they not only did nothing to help them, they actually drowned them, like flat out. They let them float there for upwards of 15 hours?
Yeah.
Did you say? Yeah, 15 hours they let that boat float there, knowing it was going to capsize because it wasn't quite in Greek waters yet. So they were just kind of waiting for something to happen out of Greek waters. And when it came into Greek waters, they just kind of pushed it out and then capsized it. And like all other points aside about how they are the patrol of the borders, they should be there rescuing people. That's what they should be doing. I'm not going to say that's their job because it's clearly not, but it's what they should be doing. But when you hear, or at least when I hear, that a human could stand there on a boat and watch people drown and beg for help, that doesn't just happen to people. Like, people don't just become like that. There's a reason why people can watch that, because
they were following orders, you know.
Yeah.
Right? That's
Even
how everyone gets out of everything.
Yeah. These are the same people that don't like, that love freedom, and they call people sheep.
Yo. Yeah. I'm a statistical kid, and I just did the math. I did 700 divided by 5. And it was 140 people for each life that we were so focused on saving when they put themselves in a predicament. They paid for the predicament they ended up in. And we can say that the people that were on that boat chose their fate, but they were running away from the fate that was given to them because of the system we're under. These people chose $250K and gave it away with their lives to go explore something that is just, I don't know why people are trying to explore.
That's a good point,
death.
actually.
You know, romanticizing it and just disrespecting something that's already been destroyed.
I would put money
they blew apart
on
Titanic.
the fact that some of the money that was spent on getting the tickets and building the Titanic submersible so they could go down, I bet some of that money was acquired through causing the conditions that force
bet.
these people to leave their homes.
You bet.
Like, I would put money on it. Like, I haven't looked into the corporations that these billionaires own, but if you're a billionaire, you've got shares in a lot of corporations. So I would put money on it that these people were fleeing war zones and climate change that was caused by the actions directly of at least one of the billionaires
And you
on
have
that
to
vessel.
consider, like, a lot of the places in the world where people are fleeing from, or situations where they're fleeing from, is because either resources, communities have been extracted from them, or completely blown out, or everything that they do own is not owned by them anymore. It's owned by Western unions. It's owned by Western organizations, institutions. It's controlled by people who are not the people who have access to it. I mean, they don't even have access to it. They just live on the land that does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's many things to consider, I think, here. The first thing that I just want to say is that the European Union and all the developed countries have created policies that specifically criminalize the mobility of people that for any reason they're fleeing their countries. And how do they criminalize them? They criminalize them by creating systems that shut down the borders, militarizing the borders, deporting them, detaining them in specific prisons designed to detain people that are fleeing and are trying to cross the border, or even deterring them from crossing into Europe. So, for example, the European Union has pushed its own borders outside of Europe, in Libya and in Turkey. So this means that people that are fleeing and are trying to cross from Libya to Europe, Europe funds Libya to keep these people trapped in Libya so they don't cross, right? Things like that. So in other words, they have extended their borders to developing countries to not let people cross. Then let's say that these people manage to leave Libya, manage to leave Turkey. What happens is what happened to that little boat in the Mediterranean is we will deter you by either sending you back, okay, or not allowing you to come in, or letting you drown, because literally they let them drown. That's how we are going to deter you. Now, the fact of the matter is that Europe and all the developed world have a responsibility and an obligation to let these people come in. Why? Because all of the things that you said, Oreo, that these people are fleeing from their own countries because developed countries have displaced their communities. So we have an obligation to bring them here. We have displaced them. We need to open our borders to them. How have we displaced them? Through extraction of resources, land grabs. You have transnational corporations going there and grabbing their land, displacing indigenous populations.
Yeah.
We have them funding militia groups within the
Right.
country and
Right.
within certain communities in order to like destabilize. Like these aren't just theories; these are facts that there's more than enough proof that it's not just a question or an investigation. It's been proven. There's been lawsuits that people have won.
But that's the thing, is that you see that it's very thought out, because though we do have an obligation, you see that when people are refugees or even immigrants, and even the ones who we see as scholars, in quotations, there's stagnancy in the system. Like, you see a doctor with 15 years of experience coming here and they'll be told you can't do that job because you're not from Canada, your degree doesn't hold up, and now they're working a job that other people might see as lower, and they're making a lot less. They can't provide for their family. And that might not look like stagnancy to others because they're still able to make money, but it keeps you from reaching limits and ideas that they promised you could reach when you came here. You see many people leave good behind.
What's the academic word for that? The societal limits that are placed on immigrants when they come to Canada, specifically if you come as like an uninvited immigrant.
Yeah, I know the word.
So other than a scouted immigrant, because Canada actually scouts people to come, rich people to come to Canada and go to the universities. A lot of students that we go to school with at UBC have been scouted by Canada and by UBC because they have money in order to come here and bring their money here to UBC and to Canada.
I don't think I've met many of my international friends who didn't take IB courses. And that's not because all my friends aren't geniuses, and most international students really do have to be above the standard, but because they have to be ready and already set up in their countries to actually like afford this type of life. They have to be IB students. You can't get in just being smart enough and being on the dean's list. You have to do what we do here and do it better. That's why their programs are different. That's why they don't have a 4-point scale grading system. They have one higher than that. And we don't need to attest to that limit. They need to prove so much more to get in. And it's crazy when you talk about our institution because they're paying a lot more to show that they are better than us. I respect it because I don't have to do that work.
Yeah, even at my, when I went to private school, we had international students come in, especially in high school. Not many came when we were in middle school, but in high school, a lot of students came every year. Like, I want to say between 50 and 100, like, per year.
Wow.
Like, and especially in grade 9.
And what city did you grow up in?
This was in Hamilton, Ontario. But I befriended some of the like students just in passing in my classes, and also because I was like in a lot of leadership positions at the school, and a lot of them would tell me like, we work so hard to get into Canadian universities and sometimes we don't get in, so we want to come here earlier so we don't have to go through that awful process, which is what we would have to do in high school to get into the same university that you guys are going to get into, doing half the amount of work that I would have had to at home. And my one friend told me, like, she would be going to school from 7 a.m. to, like, 9 p.m. because she had to play an instrument, she had to take extracurriculars, all of this to put on her applications and her resumes, and it was just crazy. And so instead she chose to come here to live with her family. Obviously she was lucky enough to be able to afford to do that, and she came to like stay with another family member that was here and do school and high school here so that she didn't have to go through that process and could still go to a good university in Canada.
You know, I relate to that a lot, Vic, and it's funny, I haven't really thought about that before, but one of the reasons my parents brought us here was for the mobility of our education and to further our education faster and better. And I guess being young, I still had a lot of that cognitive dissonance of I have to do better or I won't be able to meet up, because I got here, I was 9 and a half, and they were like, you're in grade 5. And it depleted my joy, because in Nigeria I was in like grade 7 or 8, you know? I was smart as hell. But I got here and they're like, it's not by your smartness, it's by your age. And I remember everyone that knows me personally knows how quick I went through high school, because not only did I have this fire under my butt to get it done, but I thought I had to keep up to a level that my cousins back home are still doing. Like, they are 16 in university, and I had the craziest first and second year, because why am I in university at 16 and not keeping up? But that's the thing, yo. You're 16.
Yeah, and they've created this economy around people immigrating to Canada, but they won't allow in people who are suffering from the conditions created by our activities here. Like, it's hard for me to admit, because it just makes me want to turn off this microphone and just like stop doing this, because it's hypocritical, but I have to point it out in myself. The power that's powering these microphones, that's recording these machines, that's charging my laptop, that is powering the lights in this room, that all came from oil that's taken from probably the Middle East. And then that in turn, I personally am currently participating in causing the so-called refugee crisis. So is it a refugee crisis? It has nothing to do with their activities and what they're doing. They're not doing this for on their own. We are causing this. We are causing them to be displaced, and they come here asking for help, and we tell them this is a refugee crisis. It's a
I agree
crisis.
with you, but I want you to be careful when you tread the line, because you might make yourself less. You might make yourself too accountable for the things that others are doing. Because let me give you an example that might explain me better. When we look at people recycling, like I became a compost and recycling king recently, guys. And then come to find out what I'm doing isn't shit. It doesn't matter what I do. It's not me that's really causing it. But I'm not going to stop now.
Exactly.
I'm
yeah.
not going to stop, because any little thing I do does impact everything.
It
But
impacts the culture, I think. It's the
Definitely.
mentality.
Because
It's the
if at least 2 billion people do something, the air and the ozone layer will heal a little better.
yeah.
But if we don't get the 5 corporations that are exuding the amount of air smokes we need in a year, they're doing times 7 of that every month. If we don't get to them, you recycling all your bottles and composting your food is not going to save us. So
Yeah.
though you are indirectly and to a certain degree directly responsible for the so-called crisis that's going on with refugees, it's not your fault. But you also, the fact that you have awareness makes you know how to place the thoughts down and how to have these conversations. But I don't want you to look at it as though it's because you have access to these things that things like this can move forward. These things were moving forward before you existed to,
yeah.
consume the things that came from it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think sometimes I've done so much work on that guilt and just being able to talk about things
You
that
can be over
make me
accountable.
feel guilty, Yeah, I get over accountable. I get over accountable because I'm willing to say it, because I know that it's important in order to move forward, is to not feel ashamed of things. We can't sit here in our shame and just be like, I've done so many bad things, I can't admit it and I can't move on.
Can I take it a little bit back? Can we backtrack a little bit?
Yes.
I think you both said so many wonderful things, but we're kind of I want us a little bit to recenter the idea of the refugee crisis, and you said both of you said such wonderful things about who is allowed in this country, who isn't allowed in this country, and I wanted to kind of look at this a little bit, because it's so very important.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that people out there know that Canada is one of the least welcoming countries of refugees. We've been bombarded by mainstream media that Canada is very welcoming, is very multicultural. We take a huge quota of refugees in Canada, which is absolutely not true. Right now, the numbers speak for themselves. First of all, I want to say that there, according to the most recent reports in the UN, there is 80 million people that are displaced across the globe. Of those, 30 million are climate refugees. Of those 30 million, 26 million are people under the age of 18. That means these are children. Okay? Canada, along with countries such as the US and Europe, take only 5% of refugees. 5% of refugees. 86% are being hosted by undeveloped and developing countries such as Turkey, Jordan, Libya, and so on and so forth. So I just want to make clear that Canada is one of the most ungenerous and unwelcoming country. Now, the other thing that happens in Canada, and I heard both of you saying in your comments, is that there is a clear hierarchy between desired asylum seekers or immigrants or refugees, whatever you want to call them, and undesired populations.
I like the use of the words desired and undesired there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So usually the desired populations are wealthy people, usually non-racialized people. That usually means white Europeans. So, for example, we would accept white Ukrainians, but we would not accept black Ukrainians.
Oh yeah, we'll stand in the front hallways of our schools and wave the Ukrainian flag as they
Right.
walk through the door. And don't get me wrong, I love that
Right.
they're taking in children from war. I wouldn't ever
Right.
want them to not do that.
Right.
But to even imagine how frustrating and just like hopeless I would feel as a person who has been begging people to
Yes.
respect my life in Canada, to see Ukrainians get that kind of
Yeah.
support that you have been
Yo.
asking for.
Look at Syrians.
Syrians
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
Like, please look at Syria. They've been. I can't talk about it. I'm actually gonna start crying.
Yeah.
Because they are always pleading, regardless of the people in the diaspora or the people still back in Syria. We're always looking for ways to help. People are always in need.
Yeah.
But
Instant care goes to the places that we want it to. It's. I don't have anything else.
Yeah.
But Oreo, even I just have to say, I mean, Syria, yes, a lot of people, and what Canadians have done is we
Mhm.
accepted a lot of Syrians, but we have accepted a lot of Syrians, but Syrians are white passing. And so we accept
Sure.
a lot of Syrians, but we will not accept refugees from Ethiopia. We will
Sudan.
not accept refugees from Sudan. In other words, there is a lot of anti-black racism that connects with
Yep.
who
That
is
makes a
the
lot of
desirable and the undesirable.
Yep.
Makes a lot
And
of sense.
there is also the dot that we have to connect of capitalist interests. What are the capitalist interests in this case is that a capitalist state needs cheap labor.
Yep.
So cheap labor is desirable labor because then we can bring people, temporary foreign workers, to work in the shitty jobs like, fruit picking in our farms or whatever, to do domestic labor, working as domestics, working as nannies, senior care, all of that stuff, but on the condition that, or meat packing, seafood packing.
Like the Maple Leaf company. Oh, I think I've known just about. I grew up in Winnipeg and Brandon, Manitoba, and this might be a really bad thing to say, but I think just about every Nigerian immigrant who moved to Brandon, I knew them because they worked at Maple Leaf, and anyone who came to our house would talk about, you can get a job here instantly. They wouldn't look at anything. They just knew you needed a job. I've had people have horror accidents at work, and they couldn't do much because Maple Leaf works them to the bone, but Maple Leaf hired them.
And also, if you do anything, if you try to unionize or if you're trying to complain, they would say to you, you're fired.
Yeah.
We have many people waiting in line
Or they
to
deport
replace
you.
you.
Yes,
Or they
they
deport
bring
you.
people up through work visas,
Right.
and they're very temporary work visas. You work
Yeah.
in the winter and you're back home in the summer. But that's crazy, guys, because, like I said, I grew up in Manitoba. It's negative 50, and that's when you have these people coming from insanely tropical places, working insane hours, like 13 hours starting at 11 p.m. And when they finally wake up again, it's time for work. And then we're eating this food, we're celebrating Canada Day, we're doing the things we do, and we're not considering the people that are let in. Have we actually looked at the numbers of people let in? Like, where do these refugees go when they get to Canada? If we only want to talk about the ones we have here and not even the people who we're trying to allow in, if that's the main issue, is that we allowed too many in already. They've not done anything except be here. Many of them are still suffering. Almost more, because now they're not only displaced, but they're without community.
Yeah, I'm sure they would rather be at home in their communities, in their culture, than be listening to you call them slurs on the public transport while they go to a job that they're extremely overqualified for, just because they won't accept their university degree that they went to school for like probably 4 years for, just to have it not even considered as valid. And I understand, retaking some courses on things that are different here and there, but I mean, really, like, come on. Some jobs can't be that different. It's obviously a limitation, like a purposeful limitation.
And, like, mind you, on that note, if we look at intersectionality, like, let's talk about Ukraine. There is disabled people in Ukraine who became disabled due to the things that were going on there. They're not in Canada because they couldn't get.
They're not in Canada.
They couldn't get to the office.
Facts.
They had
Facts.
one arm. They had no legs left. They lost an eye.
You know
they
what
couldn't get into Canada.
know what I learned the other day? I don't know why it took me so long to hear about this, but you know that you can't immigrate to certain places if you have an autism diagnosis, and I'm talking about like Australia, New Zealand, some places
New Zealand.
Yeah, like I don't have I have the privilege to not need a diagnosis or like medical attention or help when it comes to a lot of mental health stuff. I do have an ADHD diagnosis, but luckily that's not really considered a problem with immigration. But like if I have a friend that I want to go and do a work visa with in the summer and they have an autism diagnosis, like their visa wouldn't be accepted. You can't go and live in certain countries, and these aren't countries that you would typically racistly a thing? I'm going to make it a thing. Racistly associate with not being welcoming and not being
Like
inclusive. It's all these quote unquote first world countries that won't let you in if you have mental health issues or a disability, because they think you're going to piggyback off their healthcare system and stuff.
These places just sound like eugenics friendly places.
Oh, it is eugenics.
So the idea comes back to who is the desirable immigrant,
Yeah.
and who is the undesirable, and you see very clearly in the examples
what are the parameters for what makes you desirable, though? Like, how do we enter that type of conversation?
So the parameters here is that, are you able-bodied? Do you come from a country that is not undeveloped? That is, do you come from the global south? If you do come from the global south, which country is that? Are you white passing even that country? Because Syria is an underdeveloped country, or the global south, but Syrians are white passing, right? And then you also have the idea that there's also the gender coordinate, that a lot of queer people, gender non-conforming people, trans people, a lot of women suffer, are less desirable and suffer a lot of discrimination in the host country, right? When you come and, let's say you're an immigrant and you are working in
Or exploitation.
as a nanny, there are countless stories of a lot of women that have been abused, sexually assaulted by their employers.
So bad.
Or let's say you're a refugee, that you're gender non-conforming, or you are a woman. When you come at the borders and they put you in detention center and they keep you indefinitely there, guess what happens to you? The prison guard, immigration officers, they basically harass them, strip search them, sexually abuse them. So there is all these things that we have to think about here. Intersectionality matters, right?
Yeah, I remember when the media decided to shine a spotlight on the immigration facilities in the U.S. for a little bit. Remember when that was a fad?
For 5 seconds.
When AOC went to visit the facilities.
Yo, the thing about that is the most angry people actually got was when they saw kids with like those aluminum-looking blankets. And that was
it was in your class
blanket.
when the celebrities had a fundraiser where they wore those blankets for fun. Okay.
To raise money for
To raise
it's a charity.
Yeah. But I remember when the media decided to pay attention to the refugee crisis for like 5 seconds, like, what was it, a year ago or something like
They
that,
didn't have
when they were
stories.
talking about specifically women in detention centers. And AOC went and she said the first thing women asked her for was birth control, condoms, birth control, abortion pills, all that. That's the first thing they asked for. Now imagine you're in a facility, you have nothing, you don't have
And you just fleet
clothes or
everything you knew.
you don't have clothes or shoes or hygiene products like deodorant, a toothbrush. You probably all of your stuff is probably getting stolen, and it's probably dirty because God knows they don't hire cleaners to come in and clean those facilities.
The children had
Yeah.
lice.
Yeah, you're living with bugs, and the first thing you ask for is protection. And all women. It wasn't just some women. It's every woman she talked to asked her for protection, to give them birth control pills, condoms, and abortion pills.
And we should, speaking now about gender, the other thing that came to my mind, because we did that in the class that you took with me.
Yep.
The other example is that, I mean, I don't know if your audience knows this, but what happened was that one of the policies of deterring refugees, migrants coming from, let's say, the Americas, was to actually do a type of eugenics to the women that managed to cross the border, or to the women that they were in detention. And we talked about, how they had hysterectomies against their consent.
Mm-hmm.
That their uteruses were moved so that they could be used as an example to people that had in mind to immigrate to the U.S. so they don't come, because this is what we're going to do to you. We're going to remove your uteruses. These are practices that are happening in the 21st century and are very, very reminiscent of World War II, what the Nazis did to, racialized populations, to, Jewish people, black people, any so-called racial inferiors. Because today the migrant and the refugee has been in the mainstream media, or by the countries themselves, has been framed as a racial inferior.
Yeah.
A racial inferior. We can do anything we like to them.
Yeah.
We can drown them. We can put them in prisons. We can remove their uteruses. We can take their children away, which is what they did with indigenous people here in this country. Take indigenous children to residential schools, because at that time they were the racial inferiors. So the same thing they're doing now with the refugees. It's really despicable practices, racist and violent practices.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I have a point on that. It's like when I came here and the veil of what Canada really was fell off my eyes as I grew up, I started to see that a lot of the things that people from other countries that are not in the West, I would say, see about us are not really things that we actually hold up to. Like, we have laws in place against abuse and homophobia and things like that, but then the people who work at these institutions and at the actual levels that can enforce them to the highest authority are the ones who are the most homophobic, the most racist, the most anti-everything good.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's really interesting because you're seeing, like, female mutilation going on, like women being mutilated and beat and abused here.
Yeah.
And that's what the media always talks about. They'd be like, look at what African tribes and groups are doing. Look at what they're doing in Colombia and Mexico.
Yeah.
You need to stop doing that to women. And then you get everyone over here saying, stop doing that in those countries.
That's such a good point, because when I was in my Canadian society class, my Canadian studies sociology class or whatever, we had to read the little book that they give people who are immigrating here to study so they can do the little citizenship quiz or whatever.
And
they had it written in that book. In Canada, we do not allow barbaric cultural practices such as genital mutilation. And you know what? You do allow that, actually. Indigenous women get sterilized in the hospital.
yes.
when they go in for procedures. It happens. It really does. And actually, sometimes they allow students in medical school to practice on your unconscious
Indigenous
body
and black women
while
in
you're
Canada,
asleep.
it's no different than America. Look at the amount of black women that died giving birth in 2020 to 2022 in Ontario alone.
Yep.
Look at the Indigenous women in Manitoba.
Yep.
Those
Yep.
are the two places I can give you.
I remember, I'll never forget it. Like, I don't want to say I'm traumatized from it, because I couldn't even compare to what the woman in the video and her family went through, seeing that, and even being Indigenous, seeing that. But that video of that woman in the hospital, what is it, in Quebec, when she was when she live streamed her own death as the nurses
Just talked about
yelled
her.
slurs at her and called her stupid and an alcoholic and said she was faking it. She was live streaming, and then she died while she was begging them to help her in Canada. And this was like, it doesn't matter when it was, but it wasn't too long ago. It wasn't like,
It was recent enough
yeah,
for us to
it
know
was,
about it.
yeah. I'll never forget. It was one of the most like just gut punching like videos online I've ever seen in my life. Just the way she was screaming for help, and they were laughing at her. How could you laugh at, like, that's how you know that it's so ingrained in people.
Yeah.
Because I just couldn't even imagine, even those people that died in the tin can in the tube at the bottom of the ocean. Like, people can make jokes all you want, but even them, even I've heard people say, I feel so bad. I couldn't imagine, because imagining they were stuck at the bottom of the ocean, not imploded. I couldn't imagine being stuck down there and how scary that would be. And I heard so many people say that, but you don't hear that for the other side. And I understand there were obviously people making jokes about it and saying whatever. I'm not saying some people didn't say they didn't feel bad, but when you have, I guarantee you, anyone that said they didn't feel bad, if they were in that submarine and or submersible, sorry, because it's not a submarine, if they had the opportunity to save those people, they would. In a heartbeat, in a second, they would. But those nurses in that hospital, while they laughed at that woman while she died, they had every opportunity to help her, and they wouldn't.
Yeah.
And there's a
So
reason for that.
we need to look at the full picture of what's happening here as well. Like, because we're talking about the refugee crisis, I want to say that the number one population that are displaced or refugees, so to speak, they're removed from their lands, are indigenous people.
Yeah.
Okay? Are indigenous people, whether we're talking about Canada or we're talking about the indigenous people in the global south, any indigenous people in the global south. Why are they removed? It's very, very simple. They are removed because you have corporations going in their lands for reasons of extractivism, right? To extract oil, to extract minerals, to extract metals. So you remove those people. And this is happening in Canada. I mean, everywhere you look in Canada right now, there are so many indigenous groups that they're fighting for their territories to defend their land, right? Now, the other thing that we need to look at, so what this really means, number one, is that indigenous people are the number one population of refugees across the board, okay?
Yeah.
And this is for corporate interests, for capitalist interests, they're removed from their land. And the second thing that we have to look at is that how they are framed or have been framed since the early days of colonization. They have been framed as racial inferiors. So what do you do to so-called racial inferiors? Is you have physical means to remove them from their land, evict them from the land, but then you have other means, such as taking their children, abducting their children, sterilizing the women, destroying their cultures, destroying their languages. So these are all means to move them off their land. So all of these things are so much interconnected. Displacement can be physical, displacement can be cultural, displacement can be your language, your kids are taken away, And you see the parallels between what happens to indigenous people and what happens to, migrant women crossing the border and having hysterectomies. It's the same story.
I was going to say that it's only because of the impact of indigenous peoples and the way and the treatments of them in Canada and America, and also, the practice on Europeans first, that led us to, like, a stage where we see refugee crises like this, and we're like, oh, no. And that's why people are comfortable saying, don't let these people in. They're going to just become like those indigenous people on the street. And what about the black guys on the street? You let a bunch of people in from Sudan. You let a bunch of people in from Ethiopia 10 years ago, and they're homeless. What do you know? But that's the thing is, like, there's a lot of indigenous people who are displaced because of what has happened. And then people will start using them as scapegoats for people who would still need help. It's okay for multiple people to need help and be displaced. That's not what the conversation is about. It's about why we think certain people should be allowed and others not. And also, it's like most of the people who are pushing against it are also pushing against indigenous people being in Canada. They're the same ones pushing against reconciliation. So it makes sense.
And that's the connection.
Yeah.
And that's the connection you start to notice, and that a lot of the things that you struggle with in your own life, other people are struggling from not the same issue, but the same source that is creating their issue. Like, when you really come down to it, because what I wanted to say earlier, and I'm glad I remembered, is that when it comes down to it, what makes you a desirable immigrant is how much you are going to benefit capitalism, settler colonialism. It's not inherently about, and that's what I think people forget, is they're like, oh, well, this person doesn't look white, and it's not about them necessarily being white. It's about how much they can benefit capitalism and settler colonialism. And if you are white or white passing, you can benefit capitalism and settler colonialism and white supremacy more.
I have a point.
That's the bottom line.
Even when you're not white, you can. And I have a little.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was gonna say, sometimes it's not about race. It's about your class. It's about your social class. About how much money you have. You can immigrate to Canada no matter what your skin color is if you got enough money to bring here.
Yo, let me tell you this scenario. Let me set this up. I'm a Nigerian, and I don't know what people know about Nigeria, but we've had a lot of investors lately, and mostly from India and China. And it's been an interesting topic and conversation around, a reformed type of colonialism. And I have two instances of people that I've met in the past few weeks and months. They're both Nigerian men, and they both studied in China. Now, one of them I met at the organization I'm working for with Black Canadians with disabilities and other intersectionalities. He's using the things he learned over there from his schooling to help benefit us and help with our IT and whatever. The other guy, I found him on Twitter. He was talking about how he was very excited to be the first Nigerian representative of this company that picked him up right after he graduated school because they're trying to set up something in Nigeria. And he just signed the deal to open a company in Nigeria, and he's going to be the overseer. He doesn't have a position. He's the overseer, so he still has a bunch of bosses. But they're going to be investing in mines, schools, agriculture, and oil.
They always throw schools in there just so they can be like, we're educating children.
And that guy really thinks he's doing something good. Like, I looked at the thread, and it was a bunch of Nigerians saying, how did you cross the language barrier? How do I do this? How do we get this to the youth in our country? This is amazing. Congrats. But the thing is, they're seeing the Western people supporting him, and they're like, this is exactly what we need. You're bringing this to our country. And, like, the lighter-skinned people shook your hands.
But it's not just that. When they say, we're going to invest in mining. What they really mean, we're going to invest in Canadian corporations coming here and basically stripping bare the whole land. I mean, we have to understand that Canada, has 77 Canadian corporations own 77% of mining of the world.
Yup.
Okay, so
Yup.
what does this really mean in actual terms
Of
for
the
the
world.
people? For the people that live in Nigeria
Oh.
and in
Mm.
many
Oh.
countries.
Yeah.
What does this
So
really
the
And-
mean?
anti-blackness
yeah.
thing I was talking to you guys
Yeah.
earlier about is not
And-
even a joke.
And
No,
77%.
Canada is anti-black.
70%, 77%.
Yes.
And to take it a step
Oh my
further,
God.
Canada, because of neoliberalism, and if anybody listening isn't familiar, neoliberalism is essentially just free market. It's
the privatization of
corporations control themselves. They're not regulated by the government. They do what they want, and the only way they're controlled is supposedly it's supposed to be that they'll go out of business if they do bad things because people won't support them if they do bad things. It's not how it works, obviously. But that's how they got us to vote these policies into neoliberal. What was it, the 70s that this started, the neoliberalism? Yeah. So
No, it's actually the 80s.
the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they, because of neoliberalism, these mining corporations, the only regulation they have is a board of people that they put on that work for the company that are on this board. The government does not regulate them.
Oh, yeah.
In the UN, they actually had the UN change their human rights stuff about immigration and about who is responsible for corporations' human rights violations offshore. And they actually had a lawyer come in. I forget his name, but he did a lot of this stuff for corporations. And he came in for the US and Canada, and he drafted a new document that said that all of the same stuff, except at the end, it was like, but they don't have to regulate it. They just can if they want to. And then that's the one that's in the UN that the US and Canada signed. They said, we'll sign it as long as you don't force us to do it.
That's why it's so lax. Like, going back to that point, like, the guy was really excited about the Chinese job signing him on. But then you look at their connections to Canadian corporations and how, like, there's a lot of money that Canada is giving to Africa for the wrong reasons right now. And you look at things like that, and it's like, why do people not see it, first of all? I guess it's the opportunities that are being given. But you see videos of miners shooting residents of countries and communities because they're trying to stop them from mining their land. And it's like a white guy with the AK-47 and like a kid that hasn't had a meal that day.
And honestly, it's sad to say that shooting them is some of the least violent things that they do to people.
There's also rape.
When they're defending their land.
Because rape is being used.
Yeah.
Rape is being used to force
I mean,
populations.
I remember that video we watched in your class of the woman talking about how they scouted out her small community of houses. They waited for most of the men to leave. I don't know what they were doing. They waited for them to leave, and then the people from the corporation came in and just
and they
did horrific things. I don't even need to get
army.
into it. And you know what they did? They wore company uniforms with the company badge on them. That's how unashamed and unapologetic they were. They knew they were going to get away with it so much. They were ordered to do this. They wore their uniforms. They didn't even scratch it out.
There's organizations, there's banks in Nigeria that don't hire Nigerians. Like, you have to speak one of the languages from India or China to be able to work there. And there's people from Nigeria who have, paid their way into doing it, or they went to school in China and these companies brought them back home, and they're the ones, like, trying to sell it out to students, like, go to China and learn this and come back. And it's a great opportunity for people, but we also have to be careful about how we're doing it, because
that sounds like the same thing they did in the 1500s.
Yep, because there's billboards in Chinese, and there's Nigerian kids who don't speak their languages learning Chinese.
Yeah, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Malcolm X was educated in the first world and then went back to Africa to spread that information that he learned there in order to fight back against...
It's really sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad. I tell my friends all the time, I would love to live back home. But I don't think I can live in Nigeria, but I would want to live in West Africa. I
Yeah.
just might. But it's so weird that I have to leave my homeland. I still feel so, you know this. I've been here longer than I lived in my home country. I feel so displaced. I will wake up almost every day like, what the hell? I don't think these refugees want to be here,
Yeah.
yo.
And
You
that's
know?
actually a good
My
point.
parents chose to
That's
bring me
actually a
here.
good point.
I'm happy to be here, and I
A
want
lot
to leave.
of a lot of displacement goes unrecognized because people are displaced and when they have privilege,
Yeah.
it's called immigration. It's called finding a better life for your kids. But in
Opportunities.
reality, they were displaced from their homes. Like so many is it first generation when you're born here but your parents weren't from here, or is it second generation
It's
when you're born
first
here?
first gen when your parents aren't born here and you move here, or
Okay,
also
so many first generation
Depends, yeah.
immigrants that I've met, their parents do not want to live here.
oh no.
They don't. They want to go home. They want to bring their kids back home. But then there's always a reason why they don't. And it's nothing that they're in control of.
And when you
It's
talk about the refugee
yeah.
thing, dude, or like even the immigration process, if you really, really think about it, the people who have money are the ones that are able to do it properly and go through PR, and that's how I came.
Yeah.
And we weren't broke. We're very well off before we came to Canada. And not to say we're not doing all right as a family, but boy, oh boy, it's definitely not where we were before we came, and I'd rather be back there because I had better for myself and my family, and also because their mental state was different.
Yeah.
And
But you
that's
get
what
fed
the point
fed
is-
this facade that Canada's going to be
Exactly.
so much
But that's
better
the
and
point I was
your
trying to
life
make is,
sucks
like,
here. Your children are oppressed.
We had the money to come here, bro. And that's the issue with me is that you can't be poor coming in.
Yeah.
So when you think about the ideas and people pushing like a better life here,
Yeah.
and you come here, you give your life savings to come here, and there's nothing better.
Yeah.
However, I wanna say,
But there is better for a lot of people.
I wanna point out something very specific here, in terms of how language is being used by countries to frame people in a certain way, so they do not, the developed countries do not have to have any obligations to open the borders to
Yeah.
specific populations. So, for example, they have terms like undocumented, okay, which really criminalizes
Humanity.
people, okay, for not having, let's say, their papers. Because when you flee your country, right, when they're bombing your home, are you going to think about,
Let me grab my passport.
yeah, let me grab my passport. So anyways, they have things like undocumented, criminalizing them, illegal, criminalize them as if they broken the law. But let's be clear, it's not illegal by the UN conventions to seek safety or asylum in any country. It's a human right to move away from the place that is unsafe for you and find safety. So you're not illegal by the international conventions we have in place. Then they have the term migrant. Okay? Why do they use the term migrant? It's very simple. They use the term migrant because the UN has no specific clauses about, the countries need to give safety, open their borders to migrants. They have specific clause that clearly force or make countries responsible to let refugees come in. Okay, so they will call certain populations refugees and certain populations migrants. And the reason that they will call those populations migrants is so the countries do not have any obligation to open the borders to them. And they would call them economic migrants. And people go in Canada, hold on a second, you're an economic migrant. We don't have any obligation to you. We don't. Well, economic migrant, yeah. If I am an economic migrant, that means I'm a refugee. I'm fleeing poverty in my home. Therefore, if I'm fleeing poverty that your transnational corporation inflicted on my people and on my land,
Mm-hmm.
you have the obligation to let me in,
Yep.
right?
Because a lot of these people are people that were living on their land. They were growing their own food. They were providing for themselves and for their families. And then when you get kicked off and you have nothing, you have to get money. You're forced to work in these factories that exploit your labor. So that's what creates the poverty. It wasn't your lifestyle. It wasn't that you couldn't keep up with the times.
You lost your land.
It's that it was taken away from
Yeah.
you, and you were forced to live in a different way that you had never learned before. And not only that, but you were forced to now compete with millions of other people who were also taken off their land, who are sleeping outside of the factory already, waiting to get a job when someone dies in there.
So you're not a migrant.
Yeah.
You are an asylum seeker.
Mm-hmm.
You should be treated as that, and you should be let in.
Yeah. Because a lot of people that are able to live on their own land, grow their own food, and provide for themselves do not see themselves as poor.
Yeah.
They do not. If they can put food on the table and clothes on their children's back and get their kids to a school, they do not see themselves as poor.
There's
And
this-
I'm saying that from personal experience of people that I have met in the so-called third world. I'm like
there is
they
this,
do not see it that way.
There's this very, very powerful image that Oreoluwa uses. She talks about the gun put in the head of the person who flees their country. And she says the gun could be physical. You can have those guys that they rape and pillage and evict you from the land with the guns, from your land with the guns, but also economic poverty can be a gun on
Yeah.
your head.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
and then there's climate change. That's
Climate
just
change.
these people do not participate in activities that cause climate change. Yet they face the worst effects from it.
Eco-terrorism is hurting everyone.
Yeah.
But they don't care.
What was the statistic in the documentary Home? It was something like
Is that the documentary we watched in the
yeah, it was
Environmental Justice? Yeah.
it was a statistic of how many people live solely off the land, that do not participate in the world market economy, that do not use gas, that do not use electricity, and it was
I don't remember the exact
yeah, it was
statistic,
millions and millions of people.
but the fact of the matter is that there are many communities and many populations across the world that do not have the same lifestyles excessive lifestyles that we have in the developed world. In the developed world, we need oil 24/7 for extravagant amounts of consumption, right? And so our lifestyles causes the burning of the oil, and the burning of the oil causes the heating of the planet, the warming of the atmosphere and the heating of the planet. So we are more responsible for the climate crisis and the symptoms of the climate crisis, which is floods on those communities, which is the rising of waters in those communities, which is drought, lack of water, therefore the collapse of agriculture in those communities. This is the gun put in their head, and we do that in the developed world. We put the gun in their heads.
Yeah.
We cause the flood
Yep.
with the burning of oil. We
Yep.
cause the collapse of agriculture, and we cause them to flee. So most people have to understand that.
Yeah. And that's why calling it the refugee crisis is a tactic. It's a strategy
Semantics.
because
It's all
it
semantics.
takes the blame
Yeah.
and puts it totally on them, like it's a them problem, like they're choosing to leave their homes and everything they've known.
Like, look at the word refugee.
Yeah.
Like you're fleeing crisis. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Really.
It's almost like even to say that they're fleeing crisis, they have
That's true.
been put in that
But,
position.
yeah, It's
Like
pretty
they,
condescending,
Okay.
actually,
yeah.
Let's summarize very clearly.
Mhm.
The crisis here are not the people who flee. The crisis here is capitalism. The crisis here is imperialism. The crisis here is the climate crisis, the ecological destruction of the planet. And the crisis is capitalism and settler colonialism.
Yeah.
These are the crises.
Yeah. And they're the same crises that cause every other crisis we know of. Like everything that's one thing that really gets me about people love to say when you bring up how we should help refugees, they love to say, what about people in Canada? What about the opioid crisis? What about
We
homelessness?
should help those as well.
I always, yeah.
But they
Exactly.
are part of the opioid crisis is a result of the capitalist system.
Yeah.
The housing
Yeah.
crisis, the homelessness crisis. Who created those crises? It's the capitalist
Yeah.
system. The
Yeah.
scarcity of houses, the scarcity of food, the
Yeah.
scarcity of
Yeah, it's a created scarcity. There's no scarcity. There's millions of empty houses and millions of pounds of food thrown away every day. There's no scarcity. There's a scarcity of money. There's a scarcity of people who can afford to eat and to live.
And there's no scarcity of land either.
Yeah,
Right? When you privatize the land, when you grab the land from
Yeah.
from the peasants, the tribes, the indigenous people, that you privatize it and you're making it scarce.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. So it's
Yeah.
what I always like to say is that if you truly combat the refugee crisis, you are going to also be combating the opioid crisis, the homelessness crisis, the food insecurity crisis, missing and
It
murdered
takes, like-
indigenous women,
'Cause it's
anti-blackness.
It has to involve intersectionality and
Yeah.
pervasive care.
Because
So
to
we can't hit that.
for the
without
refugee
touching
crisis to
refugees.
truly be solved,
Yeah.
it would mean solving all of these other things as well because they come from the same source.
Yeah.
It would be making sure that profit is not the most important thing in our culture. It would be making sure that people's lives were more important than making money. That would solve all of the crises.
So-
Not immediately. Obviously, it wouldn't be easy.
Yeah, and
But-
that's the thing is like you can start at a different sector. Like
Yeah.
you can start with racism. You
It's
can
not
start with
individual.
homophobia, and
Yeah.
it's still all gonna lead us to a place where all these systems will have to start falling. It's just we don't see them as a connected thing. A lot of people are fighting individual things without intersecting understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to point out, though, one more thing, because it's so very important for people to understand that we're not powerless. Many of us in multiple communities right now are fighting tooth and nail to protect the land, to protect the water, to protect people that are fleeing war and poverty, to protect the houseless, and there are many people that resist the radical fight. What does this really mean? The radical fight is they resist capitalism, not just putting band-aids. Oh, we're going to join an NGO and we're going to bring food in your community and we're going to give you more housing and we're going to build orphanages and we're going to build schools in Nigeria, I don't know what, all of that stuff. No, that's not the real fight. The real fight is we fight the pipelines, we fight the mining corporations. We want to kick them out of their home. We fight in Fairy Creek to protect the trees, which are our relatives. We fight in so many levels, right?
Yep.
Redistribute police funds.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So this is a form of to me, it gives me a lot of hope, knowing that there's so many groups that are defending.
Yeah.
We are defending each other and we are defending the land. So many groups, and I would encourage everybody to join movements, which is the most important thing.
Yeah. I always say to people, pro tip, if you want to join a movement or volunteer for an organization, if they talk about capitalism, I would say try it out.
Yeah.
If they don't, I would say maybe not.
Yeah, and I'd say revolution is accessible. So
Yeah.
there's always ways you can be involved.
Yeah,
There's
it's
so many things you can do. You
it's
don't have to be the person at protest.
yeah, it's
You
so
don't
hard
have
to
be the one
imagine.
speaking out. There's different ways you can help. If you speak in, if you like being within the community and not being on the outside. There's so many things that can be done. There's so many ways to help. There's so many things we need every day, other people need that we can provide. There's so
Yeah.
many different types of volunteers. You'd be surprised what you could do.
Yeah.
From your house
And it
alone.
works.
And it works.
It works because, I mean, so many, for example, so many indigenous communities, they have managed to cancel pipelines
Yeah.
because they worked hard
Mhm.
to defend their
Yeah.
land and fight against them. And that has happened in Canada, it has happened in the US, it has happened in the global south, so many communities. So it really works
Yeah.
to join movements.
Yep. Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
Mobilization.
And I think that like the biggest thing is it's so hard to imagine the world taking a turn like that. But the real question is like it's whether we wait until we're too uncomfortable,
Yeah.
or because so many people are too uncomfortable but not enough.
Definitely. It's like, do you want to wait until you have literally no time left to think
Yeah.
about it, or do you want to start considering it and visualizing it? Like,
Yeah.
we don't think it's real because we don't think about it enough.
Yeah.
If you put it into perspective, there's nothing that's impossible, really. There's nothing new under the sun. Revolutions happen already, or we wouldn't have capitalism. It's not
Yeah.
an old system.
Yeah.
It's brand new. Paper is still being learned how to be printed properly. There's countries that are breaking down trying to print new money sometimes.
Capitalism is 300 years old. That's
Yeah.
the majority of human history. We've lived without capitalism. What this tells us is that we can actually continue living without capitalism.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We know how to do it. Is in our cultural DNA. Our ancestors did it. Indigenous people have done it.
Yeah,
We
and
know-
lots of people live that
Yeah.
way already.
And that's not to say like people have not always hoarded wealth, or like had power, or caused coups.
Yeah,
Just not
but
at a
currently, I
grand
think
scale.
the current problem is we live in a system that encourages people to hoard wealth, and
reinforces
instead
it.
we could build a culture and a system that discourages that kind of behavior, that has cultural punishment and community-based, like,
Oh,
responses to someone
Regulate-
that's being selfish and greedy.
regulating
Yeah.
corporations, actually taxing them,
Mhm.
taxing them for the crimes they commit against our communities.
Yeah.
Taxing them. And so when you tax corporations this way, then the next time the corporation says, you know what, I don't want to pay all of this money because that is no profits for me.
Yeah.
So, taxing them.
Yeah,
And
'cause-
also bringing them into criminal courts. We have international courts like the
Yeah.
Hague, in Hague, of trying criminals. They are criminals. They commit
Yeah.
crimes against humanity, against
sucks.
indigenous
Our
people.
problem currently
The only-
is that
the thing
it's
is there's
a lot
only
of the stuff they
people-
do isn't illegal.
I was gonna say, and most of the things that are happening, the only people who can confront them are rich, and you have to have those type of people willing to call them out, because common folk can't go fight like a corporation in the court of law, because not only will you lose, but then they will use everything, and they have billions, and you have like your $30,000 a year job. They will ruin your life just because you try
Yeah.
to fight them. You know.
However, there are examples right now happening
There's a
that you
change.
have particularly court cases of young people, and I believe there is one in Ontario of nine litigants that they are suing big oil, and they are suing, I think, the government of Ontario for encouraging big oil, and they're going to court. So we do have
Power
power.
in the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the opposite of what capitalism is doing. Hey, like you're saying, is the individuality of it all.
Yeah.
Like you fall down for whatever you do. It's no calling in people. There's no transformative justice. It's
Yeah.
this is what this person did. They get persecuted for it because we like making scapegoats to scare people to stay within the realms of capitalism.
Yeah.
You know? It's like if you don't do the right thing, you'll be. But I don't know. We didn't write the rules. They did, and good and wrong is subjective to a
But
certain
we
degree.
can fight. We
Oh,
can
yeah.
fight the rules.
Oh, yeah.
We're not victims.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that everybody understands we're not victims.
No.
We can fight against them despite the fact they've always had institutions behind them, like the military, the police,
Yep.
the courts. They've always had that.
The church.
The church,
Oh. Ooh.
yeah. But we can fight them. Yeah.
We're talking about disruption. Like, something that comes up for me is, like, when I say we have to be disruptors, what I'm thinking of and my mind's going back to right now is the counter protests that were happening in Vancouver recently around Chinatown and trying to build affordable housing units and not tearing down what has become of Chinatown and just implementing things. I think it was just people and everyone in Vancouver really that cares trying to keep the heritage and history of Chinatown alive without letting it just become another thing of the past that we have in Vancouver. Because you go down so many neighborhoods nowadays, and it's just there used to be a community here, and now it's uprises and high rises or whatever. And in disrupting that, like having counter protesters go to I don't know if it's the day they were voting the bill in or whatever. We didn't win, but the fact that there was numbers and there was people there and there was always people to let whoever is making these rules and putting these things in place know that you are affecting people. They might not see anything to our faces, they might not really care, but if we continue to show up, there's humanity in at least one of them.
Yeah.
And
I think that's an important point, is that what capitalism as a system counts on is people not caring enough to show up
or
and
being
stand
numb
up
to it.
and speak up, and not caring enough to risk their safety to stand up for something. So the one thing you can do to disrupt is just show up and let institutions know that you're not okay with the way things are right now, because they count on enough people being okay with it that they can keep going, even if people are angry, even if there's outrage.
Yeah.
They count on it dying down. They count on it doing that. So if you just show up and you continue to let institutions know, these are my beliefs, I'm not going to stand down. I stand with these people, especially if you're not a part of that group, to show up anyways, and just be there to just show that, like, there is people that care.
And that happened in
Yeah.
I mean, in the George Floyd uprisings,
Yeah.
there's countless people after the the killing of George Floyd. So many people go down on the street and they
Yeah.
showed up for black people, whether you were black or white, it didn't matter, or indigenous, it didn't matter. They all showed up.
Yeah.
But I also want to make a point, Victoria, that is very, very important for me. If you want to look everything from a caring point of view, I also want to make sure that we do not shame the people that, for psychological reasons, do not feel ready to show up. And the
Agreed.
the reason I'm saying this is because we have to keep reminding ourselves that it's not the fault of the people that don't show up. It's basically power has so much force, they have everything. They have the lawyers, they have the police, they can tear gas you, they can shoot you with bullets. So people are afraid, justifiably so. So
Yeah.
we have to be very, very careful. We do need to show up,
Yeah.
but also to strike a balance where we don't
Yeah.
shame the people that are
Yeah.
afraid.
Show up how you can.
Show up how you can.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
that's what I was saying. Like, If you want to get involved, find a community. It's very accessible. If you have ways that you would like to be involved, I should say.
Yes.
There's always ways that you can be.
Yeah.
It's accessible to care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you were saying when I brought up being a disruptor, the first example you gave me was people that were by the water in the Mediterranean pulling people's bodies out. And that made sense to me in the minute until Litsa, helped direct us in the right direction. And why would that not be disruption? As I'm sitting here thinking about it, you can lose your life doing that and they wouldn't care. You could lose your life doing that as well and they wouldn't care. Like, you did not disrupt the system or even the people that were keeping them away from getting to safety. You maybe disrupted one person's chance at being dead,
Mm-hmm.
but in the whole grand scheme of things, disrupting has to be more than the minuscule we can do instead of being standard by.
Yeah, you have to disrupt the money.
Yeah.
That's what it really is.
Yeah,
You have to
it's
stop the money.
unfortunate.
Where it hurts them
Yeah.
in their pockets. You have
'Cause-
to disrupt,
Yeah.
hurt their
Yeah,
pockets.
You can't stand in front of every bullet. You can't pull everyone out of every water. It's unfortunate. You can't cut down every rope of any lynched person. We just can't.
Yeah.
We just can't. It's
You just
true.
have to stop the next thing from happening
Yeah, by
with
disrupting it
by
properly.
disrupting the system before
Yeah.
it can.
And that's community organizing.
Yeah.
That's showing up.
Community, that's the
Yeah.
important thing here.
Community.
Yeah, you're not by yourself.
Mhm.
You have to think that you're not by yourself. You're part
Yeah.
of the community. You organize with the community because there is strength in numbers,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? By yourself, you cannot do much.
And I
But
think
when we are
forget
together,
that.
we can.
We
Yeah.
forget that a lot.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
big thing I see in my generation, at least, is that we build communities, but we only build them based on people that are close in similarities or parameters or lived
Yeah.
experience to us. But communities were never like that. Communities are now about what you have in common. Communities
Yeah.
are about the common shared idea and the theories that impact those. What is it that we are trying to receive for our own radicalization, I would say, or revolutionized state of living? What do we need to do? That's what we need to think about. Not are you smarter than me? Or I wouldn't
do you
mind having a
have-
racist
do-
in my group,
or-
honestly, if we were fighting for queer disabled rights or something.
Yeah. If
You
we
can be
yeah.
racist as long as two of my other identities are something you care about and you will fight beside me. I might stand two people
Yeah.
beside you, but I will still
Yeah.
be there with you. And it's unfortunate to say it like that, but that's where we start. We
That's
call
what-
people in.
That's what
once they show
community
up.
is. That's what community
Right?
is.
You
It's
can't prevent them from
Yeah.
trying to show up to begin with. Community is not, you look like me, you act like me, so come. It's
and you think like
everyone
me. Yeah.
that wants to be here to do what
Yeah.
we need to do should show up.
Yeah.
Once they show up, we can educate. We try to educate before people are allowed in. You keep
Yeah.
people out by saying you have to be
Yeah.
this or you have to
You have to
like
be this before you even get a
come in.
chance.
Everyone should be allowed in the door. It's what they do after they're allowed in that determines whether or not we can allow them to stay, if they're willing to learn, or if we have the capacity to teach. But I hope there's people who are not only not showing up because people have made them feel like they shouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that has happened. Maybe
Yeah.
you didn't show up properly, but it's not only your fault if they did not help you understand how to.
Yeah.
It's okay to try again.
Yeah.
we need you.
Instead of creating borders in our own communities, we need to shut them down and
Boom.
include everyone.
Everybody.
Mhm.
It might be
Yeah.
uncomfortable, but guys, we need discomfort.
Yeah.
Discomfort is how we grow, unfortunately.
Yeah. And
If
that's
you
why
don't
I
feel
like
uncomfortable,
I
you
like
don't
that
change.
I like that closing note is that the refugee crisis is really a border crisis. It's about borders that are put up and that are constructed and that are militarized, and the borders extend past the borders that separate our countries and our cities. They put them up in our homes, in our schools,
In our
in
hearts.
in our communities. They put borders between, and they're called empathy walls. It's real, like it's an academic term and a psychological term about how you have certain empathy limitations because of how you're raised and what you were taught. And they put borders in our lives and in our ideologies and in our brains, and
they individualize every
Yeah.
single situation
And that's the
issue,
real-
fight,
yeah.
person.
that's a real refugee crisis.
You know, everything's separate. Like, it could be women in Afghanistan, women in Syria, women and children, mind you, in Syria, Afghanistan, Iran. but we'll talk about them on separate notes.
Yeah.
You hear it on the news. They're never gonna join them together and show you how bigger picture these things are only happening
Yeah.
because of certain things. It's
Mhm.
always an individualized problem that only needs to be fixed right now.
Agreed.
It's never a grand scheme thing, and
So-
that's the issue.
So the idea here is that in our culture, we learn that we are separate beings, separated from each other
Yeah.
by skin color, ethnicity, class, gender, ability, and so on and so forth. And the only way to combat that is to keep telling ourselves that we're not separate. We're
Yeah.
connected.
Yeah.
We're connected not just amongst human beings, but with the entire web of life.
Mhm.
We are all connected. When they teach us separation, we counteract it with connection.
Yeah.
And community
Yeah.
is connection.
Agreed.
Can fully agree.
Well, I think we should close with that. I think that was a good note.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much for being here with us, Litsa.
Thank you so much, Oreoluwa, for the wonderful ideas, and thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Victoria, for your ideas and for hosting the whole thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you guys for being here and talking into my microphone.
Of course, anytime.
Well, we're going to go unwind and crack some jokes or something. I hope everybody has a wonderful life. All right.
Self-care.
See you next time.
Resist.
Yeah.